15,000 people run in the first Hong Kong marathon since the implementation of the national security law. Carrie Lam to go back to work after suffering an injury to her right elbow. And authorities hint at the possible introduction of booster jabs for vulnerable groups. Good evening. The city welcomed the return of the Hong Kong Marathon with more than 15,000 runners testing their physical limits. However, some pushed too hard as about 400 people needed medical assistance. Close attention was also paid to certain participants. That's because this was the first large-scale sporting event in the territory since the national security law took effect last year. Caleb Lum has our top story.
After a pandemic-induced hiatus last year and 2 postponements this year, the Hong Kong Marathon returned at 6 a.m. Acting Chief Executive John Lee and Police Commissioner Raymond Siu officiated the opening ceremony. The starting point for both the full and half marathons was on Nathan Road, Tsim Sha Tsui. All participants were required to be fully vaccinated with COVID jabs as well as test negative for the coronavirus. Runners also needed to wear masks before starting, but were allowed to remove them once the race began. As for this year's 10-kilometer race, the starting point was moved to the Western Harbour Crossing Toll Plaza. Some runners kept their masks on for this shorter contest. Like previous years, some runners dressed up and had a message to deliver.
But now for the environment protection, we should everybody would pay attention and we don't take shots for the shots please.
But not all outfits were welcomed.
With the enactment of the national security law, runners are prohibited from donning on outfits displaying political slogans. Those who breach the rule are barred from running in the event.
Police officers as well as race staff intercepted some runners at the start of the 10-kilometer run. This man was disqualified after he refused to change his t-shirt that displayed a political message. Those who did change were allowed to participate. Runners who had politically sensitive tattoos were asked to cover up. The organizers stressed the marathon is a sports event and no political element should be involved. All of today's races concluded at Victoria Park. Some felt unwell when they reached the finishing point, with a few taken to hospital for medical attention. Local runners claimed victory in both the men's and women's marathons. Wong Kai-lok beat out Japan's Masashi Shirotake by a mere 4 seconds in the men's event. While Hong Kong's Christy Yu finished well ahead of the pack to claim the women's title. Caleb Leung, TVB News.
Chief Executive Carrie Lam, who's on leave due to injury, will return to work tomorrow. In a social media post, Lam said that it will take some time and more physiotherapy to achieve a full recovery and for her life to return to normal. On Monday, Lam fell down the stairs during a dinner banquet at Government House, her official residence. That landed her in hospital with a fractured right elbow. The city reported 4 new COVID cases, all were imported and carry a mutant strain. Authorities also hinted at the possible introduction of a booster shot for vulnerable groups. That's in addition to potentially allowing children as young as 5 to receive a vaccine. Kayla Chu tells us more.
Among today's newly registered COVID cases, 3 were arrivals from the Philippines, with 2 of them being for domestic helpers. The remaining patient is an aircrew member who flew in from Saudi Arabia. There are also 5 presumptive diagnoses pending confirmation. On Wednesday, health authorities will discuss whether to offer a 3rd booster shot against COVID to vulnerable groups. Government Health Advisor David Hui said if the plan goes through, those participating will need to keep receiving an additional jab every year or 2.
Booster vaccinations should be given priority to those who have immunocompromised condition. The second group would be the elderly, aged 60 years plus, followed by the frontline healthcare workers.
With the arrival of the flu season, he added that the city will highly likely follow the WHO's guidelines regarding co-administering people with both flu and COVID shots.
You can actually co-administer both influenza and COVID-19 vaccines without any major problem. So you give one on one arm and the other one on the other arm, and that will actually make it more convenient.
Such a practice would diverge from what other experts recommended to separate the two jabs by 14 days. Details of the plan will be examined next week as well. Currently, children aged 12 are the youngest age group eligible for COVID shots in the city. And in about 1 or 2 months, the age bar could be lowered to also cover those aged 5 to 11. That's according to Ivan Hung, the co-convener of an expert committee looking at vaccine side effects. With young children also being extra vulnerable to the flu, he urged parents to get their kids protected against it. However, he recommended they should be immunized with nasal spray due to many children having a fear of needles. Kina Chu, TVB News.
A magnitude 6.5 earthquake struck northeastern Taiwan. Tremors were felt across the north of the island, including the capital, Taipei. There were no immediate reports of casualties. Footage showed the intensity of the quake. The epicenter was near Yilan County, at a depth of around 67 kilometers. The major quake shook the island at around 1 p.m. It was followed by 2 less powerful tremors. Forecasters believe this was the island's most severe earthquake in 30 years. They are not ruling out more aftershocks. Here in Hong Kong, the observatory received more than 10 reports of people claiming to have felt the tremors. Overseas, a top UK scientific advisor has called for the implementation of stricter measures to help clamp down on the growing surge of COVID-19 in the country. Meanwhile, Russia posted a record high of infections and deaths. Elsewhere, Singapore will begin offering the Sinovac jab, while South Africa is addressing a vaccine shortage.
Stephen Reicher, a member of the British government's Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, said mask mandates could be necessary to avoid the enforcement of tougher restrictions such as lockdowns in the UK later this year. He added that while vaccine uptake in the country provided a huge advantage in preventing the spread of COVID, he believed that on its own it's not quite enough to see off the threat posed by the virus. The warning comes after Britain's Health Secretary Sajid Javid called for people to exercise caution when out in public to stem infection rates. Britain has recorded an average of 47,000 new cases of COVID a day in the past week. That's up 18% from the previous 7 days. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has outlined that Westminster may reimpose certain restrictions in winter, but has yet to clarify further details on the matter. Meanwhile, Russia reported another record high daily number of coronavirus infections and deaths. Russia's National Coronavirus Task Force said that 1,075 people have died from the virus over the past 24 hours, and that a further 37,678 new infections were detected. These are the largest single-day figures to have been posted in the country during the pandemic so far. Russia's infection rate has risen by around 70% in the past month, with only about 1/3 of the population having been inoculated. President Vladimir Putin has responded by ordering Russians to stay away from workplaces if possible between October 30th and November 7th. Many Russian regions are imposing additional curbs on public life, including closing gyms, theaters, and halting dine-in services at restaurants. Elsewhere in South Africa, scientists are attempting to reverse engineer Moderna's COVID vaccine. Some experts believe recreating vaccines in this way could help address jab shortages in developing countries. Singapore's health ministry will begin offering China's Sinovac coronavirus jab as part of its mass inoculation program. This comes after the vaccine was granted authorization for use in the city-state. The move will allow those who cannot take mRNA shots for medical reasons to safely receive a jab. Singapore's health ministry outlined that patients must receive 3 doses of Sinovac's jab to be considered fully vaccinated. So far, almost 85% of the country's population has completed a 2-dose course of a coronavirus vaccine. The Singapore government also announced that starting in January, only employees who are vaccinated or have recovered from COVID-19 within 270 days can return to the workplace. Those who refuse vaccination will have to pay for a daily test and need a negative result before they can return to their jobs.
The top North Korean affairs official in the US met with his South Korean counterparts to discuss Pyongyang's latest missile tests. Sung Kim called on the North to rekindle dialogue with Washington.
We call on the DPRK to cease these provocations and other destabilizing activities and instead engage in dialogue. We remain ready to meet with the DPRK without preconditions, and we have made clear that the United States harbors no hostile intent towards the DPRK. We hope the DPRK will respond positively to our outreach.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan told his foreign ministry to declare 10 ambassadors from Western countries persona non grata for calling for the release of a jailed philanthropist. Osman Kavala is in prison for allegedly financing protests in 2013 and involvement in the 2016 attempted coup in Turkey. Matthew Ray reports.
In a joint statement on October the 18th, envoys of the United States and 9 other countries, 7 of whom are NATO allies of Turkey, called for the urgent release of Osman Kavala. Kavala is part of several civil groups. He was acquitted last year on charges related to the 2013 protests, but the ruling was overturned and combined with other charges linked to the coup attempt to topple Erdogan that failed in 2016. The ambassadors were summoned by the foreign ministry, which called the statement irresponsible. Erdogan, speaking on Saturday in a Western city, was not exactly sounding compromising. Kavala is the Turkish branch of Soros. These ambassadors went to the Foreign Affairs Ministry for him. What is this impudence? While not exactly clear what he was on about regarding Soros, the envoys declared persona non grata will have to leave Turkey. Observers say the jailing of Kavala is political. Ankara denies this and says its courts are independent. The US, German and French embassies have not officially responded to the Turkish move, but Erdogan is scheduled to meet US President Joe Biden at the G20 summit in Rome later this month. One diplomatic source said de-escalation was possible now Turkey has made its position clear. The European Court of Human Rights, or ECHR, called for Kavala's release 2 years ago, saying there was no reasonable evidence he had committed any offence. The Council of Europe, which oversees ECHR decisions, said it will begin infringement proceedings against Turkey if Kavala is not freed, but his trial is scheduled ongoing on November 26. Matthew Bray, TV News.
In local politics, to run for a directly elected seat in the Legislative Council under Hong Kong's new electoral system, contenders need to secure at least 2 nominations from each of the 5 sectors in the election committee. That has meant more difficulty for non-establishment hopefuls. This has prompted some political groups to join forces, including the Path of Democracy. Jackie Lin spoke with the group's convener to discuss their future plans.
The national security law has brought a sea change in Hong Kong's political landscape. For what's left among the city's non-establishment parties, Path of Democracy and Third Side have forged a new alliance to prepare for the December Legislative Council election. The 2 political groups say they share the same mission of safeguarding one country, 2 systems, upholding China's sovereignty over the SAR, promoting democratic reform, and working towards improved governance of the city. Speaking to TVB, Ronnie Tong, convener of Path of Democracy, says the absence of traditional Democrats entails more opportunities for middle-of-the-road parties like them.
Most Hong Kong people would not like to see LegCo being dominated or monopolized by a single party or a single political camp. On that basis, I think people like us who are pioneering a new political front, we call it the third way, has a certain opportunity to win.
How confident are you in securing the votes from the election committee and probably?
In relation to functional constituencies and the election committee sector, it would be more difficult for a political organization like us to gain any headway in the election there. So at the moment we're concentrating on the geographical sector.
In the past, both parties that formed the new alliance fielded candidates to run in the LegCo polls. None of them bagged a seat. Meanwhile, the government proposed that defendants involved in criminal cases could no longer pick their own lawyers if they apply for legal aid. The Bar Association worries the move could be in breach of Article 35 of the Basic Law, which enshrines people's right to choose their own legal representation. As a former chair of the group and a member of the Executive Council, Tong disagrees.
People cannot expect that they are in the position to dictate their choice, particularly when they are using public money to fight their personal cases.
Some people who say like it would be unfair to some defendants who might have certain political inclinations.
No, I mean, I don't see that as anything which can be said to be unfair. To say that you are presupposing or implying that people not of your choice are not good enough. Now that simply is unfair.
Jackie Lim, TFB News.
Authorities seized some 17,000 smuggled hairy crabs. The food has a market value of roughly $1.5 million. They lacked certificates of authorization by mainland authorities. The discovery was made on Friday when customs officers stopped and searched an incoming cross-boundary truck at the Mancam Tow control point. Roughly 1.1 tons of frozen meat and poultry worth around $60,000 were also brought into the city without permission. A 47-year-old driver has been arrested in an ongoing probe. An explosion occurred at a garage on Chonghua Street in Cheungsha-wan at around noon. Smoke could be seen billowing from the structure when firefighters arrived. Crews put out the blaze and retrieved car tires. Around 150 people were evacuated from nearby buildings, but luckily nobody was injured. Initial investigations suggested the explosion was caused by a charger overheating. And let's take a look at the weather before we go. It will be mainly sunny and dry. Temperatures will range between 20 and 27 degrees. And that's the news. Thanks for watching.